The instant his hand reached for my teacup and poured it into the sink while I was mid-sip, I understood that tolerance had crossed into surrender. My name is Elena Castellano, and at 71 years old, I had lived through enough seasons to recognize when winter had arrived uninvited into my own home. The porcelain cup shattered against the stainless steel, with a sound that rang sharper than any word he could have thrown at me. I stood there with my hands still raised, fingers curled around air where warmth had been seconds before, and watched the amber liquid spiral down the drain, along with whatever illusion I had been clutching. It was a Tuesday afternoon in August, the kind where Phoenix heat presses against windows like an unwanted visitor, and I had been sitting at my kitchen table, the one I purchased 43 years ago, when my husband Vincent was still alive, and mornings meant planning, not surviving. The table was scarred with decades of family meals, homework sessions, and quiet cups of tea that marked the spaces between one responsibility and the next. That cup of tea, that specific ritual at 3:15 every afternoon, was mine. It belonged to no one else. But my son-in-law, Marcus Brennan, had decided otherwise. It was simply the first time he had said it out loud. Behind him, my daughter Sophia stood frozen near the refrigerator, her hands gripping a container of leftover pasta she had been about to reheat. Our eyes met across the 10 feet of linoleum that had somehow become a canyon. I waited for her to say something. Anything. "Mom, that was uncalled for. Marcus, apologize. Do not treat her like that." The words I needed hovered in the air between us, visible only to me. Sophia blinked twice, looked down at the container, and placed it in the microwave without a sound. The hum of the machine filled the silence where her voice should have been. That was the moment. Not the first insult, not the first dismissive comment, but the moment when my own daughter chose a man's comfort over my dignity. And I realized I had been teaching her that choice for 5 years. 5 years of making myself smaller, quieter, less present, in the home I had built with my own hands and my own money. I turned and walked down the hallway to my bedroom, the one at the back of the house that used to be the master suite, until Sophia and Marcus arrived, and I offered it to them because family helps family. That is what I told myself then. Family makes sacrifices. Family adjusts. The hallway felt longer than usual, each step measured and deliberate. I passed photographs on the wall that documented a life I barely recognized anymore. Sophia as a baby, her face bright with the kind of joy that comes before the world teaches you to dim it. Vincent and me on our wedding day, young and hopeful and completely unaware of how quickly 40 years would pass. My mother in her garden, hands in the soil, face turned toward the sun. These images were witnesses to a version of myself that had known how to take up space, how to laugh without checking first if anyone minded. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed that had become too narrow for the shape my life had taken. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from something colder and more clarifying. Rage, not the hot explosive kind, but the slow burning type that clears fog and sharpens vision. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out the metal lockbox I kept beneath old photographs and expired insurance policies. Inside were the documents I once handled with the precision of a woman who understood that paper carried more weight than promises. I had worked for 34 years as a senior processor at the Maricopa County Recorder's Office. I knew every line, every clause, every legal protection that separated ownership from occupancy. The house deed lay on top, recorded and notarized, my name alone printed in bold letters across the top. Elena Marie Castellano, sole owner. No joint tenancy, no transfer on death, no Marcus Brennan anywhere on the page. I ran my finger along the embossed county seal, and felt the first smile I had worn in weeks pull at the corners of my mouth. Marcus had taken my tea, my table, my peace, but he had never touched this, and tomorrow he was going to learn what happened when you mistook patience for powerlessness. But before tomorrow could come, I needed to understand exactly how I had arrived at this moment. I needed to trace the path that had led from welcoming my daughter and her husband for what was supposed to be a brief stay, to becoming a stranger in my own kitchen. I sat back against the headboard and let my mind travel backward through the years, not with regret, but with the kind of clarity that only comes when you are ready to face uncomfortable truths. 5 years ago, Sophia had called me on a Wednesday evening, I remembered it specifically because Wednesday was the night I took myself to dinner at the small Italian restaurant down the street, a tradition I had started after Vincent died, as a way of proving to myself that I could still enjoy a meal alone, without feeling diminished by solitude. Her voice had been tight with stress, threaded through with the kind of desperation that only a mother can hear in the spaces between words. "Mom," she had said, "we need help. Marcus lost his contract. The company downsized. We have been looking for something new, but nothing has come through yet. Our lease is up in 2 months, and we cannot afford to renew it. I need to ask you something, and I need you to say no if it does not work for you. Can we stay with you? Just temporarily. Just until we get back on our feet." I had said yes immediately. "Of course you can. You are my daughter. This is your home too. Stay as long as you need." Looking back now, I could see the first error in that sentence. Stay as long as you need. I had given no boundary, no time frame, no expectation of contribution. I had simply opened the door and assumed that need would be temporary, that gratitude would translate into action, that my daughter's husband would treat my generosity with respect. I had been wrong on all counts. They moved in on a Saturday in September. The weather had just started to shift from unbearable to merely oppressive, and I remembered helping Sophia carry boxes up the front steps, while Marcus directed from the doorway, his back bothering him, he said, from all the packing. Even then, I noticed the imbalance. Sophia sweating and straining, Marcus supervising and complaining. But I said nothing. I told myself he was stressed, that unemployment did things to a man's pride, that once he found work again, things would level out. The first month was pleasant enough. Sophia cooked dinners, and we ate together like a family. Marcus was polite, even charming at times, telling stories about his career in project management, about the deals he had closed, the teams he had led. He spoke with the confidence of a man who believed his own resume, and I wanted to believe it too. I wanted to believe my daughter had chosen well, that this rough patch was just that, a patch, and that soon they would be gone, and I would have my quiet house back. But the second month brought small changes. Marcus stopped looking for work every day. He took over the living room with his laptop and his papers and his phone calls that never seemed to lead anywhere. He began making comments about the house, little observations that felt like criticisms. "You know, this place could use some updating. When was the last time you replaced the water heater? That couch is pretty worn out. Have you thought about getting something more modern?" At first, I dismissed these as harmless observations. Then they became suggestions. "We should really get a new television. The one you have is so small. You should let me handle the yard work. You are getting too old to be out there in the heat." Each suggestion came wrapped in concern, but beneath it was a message I did not want to see. "You are not capable. You need me. This house needs me." By the third month, Marcus had stopped pretending to look for work altogether. He spent his days on the couch, scrolling through his phone, watching videos, playing games, existing in a state of permanent leisure, while Sophia worked full-time, and I continued to pay for everything: the groceries, the utilities, the internet he used for hours every day, the water, the electricity, the property taxes. I said nothing. I told myself that this was temporary, that confrontation would only create tension, that I was helping my daughter, and that was what mattered. But the truth I was only now willing to admit, was that I was afraid of being seen as selfish, afraid of being called cruel, afraid of my daughter choosing him over me if I forced her to choose. So I stayed silent, and my silence became permission. Permission for Marcus to treat my home like his own. Permission for him to treat me like a landlord he never had to pay. Permission for him to take and take and take until there was almost nothing left of me. By the end of the first year, I had moved into the smaller bedroom. It was not a decision that was discussed or requested. It simply happened. Marcus made an offhand comment about needing more space for his home office, about how the master bedroom had better light, about how it would just be more practical. And I, in my endless accommodation, had said, "Of course, take it. I will move my things this weekend." I packed up my clothes, my books, my small collection of jewelry that Vincent had given me over the years, and I relocated myself to the back of my own house, like a tenant. The second year brought new patterns. Marcus began speaking to me with increasing dismissiveness. When I offered opinions, he talked over me. When I asked questions, he sighed as if I was wasting his time. When I cooked meals, he criticized the portions, or the seasoning, or the timing. Too much salt, not enough garlic, why are we eating so late? Nothing I did was right. Nothing I provided was enough. And Sophia, my Sophia, watched it all happen, and said nothing. I started to notice how she moved around him, careful and anticipating, always trying to read his mood before it turned. She stopped laughing as much. She stopped telling me about her day. She stopped asking me for advice. She became a shadow version of herself, and I became a shadow version of myself. And together we lived in a house that had stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like a waiting room for a sentence neither of us had the courage to name. The third year was when the financial strain became undeniable. My savings, which I had built carefully over decades of modest living and smart choices, began to erode. I was covering 3 people's expenses on a fixed income designed for 1. I stopped going out to dinner on Wednesdays. I stopped buying new clothes. I stopped replacing things that broke because money was tighter than it had ever been. And Marcus, who contributed nothing, continued to live as if scarcity was someone else's problem. I tried once, gently, to raise the issue. It was a Sunday morning, and Sophia was at work. Marcus was in the kitchen, making himself an elaborate breakfast, eggs and bacon and toast and coffee, using groceries I had purchased the day before. I stood in the doorway and said, "Marcus, I need to talk to you about finances." He did not look up. "What about them?" "Well, I have been covering all the household expenses for 3 years now, and I am finding it difficult to sustain. I was wondering if you and Sophia might be able to contribute something toward groceries or utilities." He set down his spatula and turned to face me, his expression cold. "Are you serious right now? You are asking me for money when you know I have been struggling to find work? Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" I tried to backtrack. "I am not trying to make you feel bad. I am just saying that this arrangement was supposed to be temporary, and it has been 3 years. Maybe it is time to revisit things." He shook his head, a bitter smile on his lips. "Unbelievable. You invite us to stay. You say family helps family, and now you are putting a price tag on it. That is really cold, Elena, really cold." He turned back to his breakfast, and I stood there, stunned into silence by the way he had twisted my reasonable request into an act of cruelty. I did not bring it up again. That was my mistake. My silence was interpreted as acceptance, and Marcus's entitlement only grew. The 4th year brought more of the same, but amplified. Marcus started making decisions about the house without consulting me. He moved furniture. He threw away things that were mine because he deemed them outdated or unnecessary. He invited his friends over without asking, and they filled my living room with noise and mess and the kind of casual disrespect that comes from people who do not value the space they occupy. I became invisible in my own home, a background figure who existed only to keep the electricity on and the refrigerators stocked. And then came the 5th year, the year when something inside me finally broke, or perhaps more accurately, finally woke up. It started small. A friend from my old job, a woman named Denise who had always been sharp and clear-eyed, invited me to lunch. We met at a quiet cafe, and she asked me how I was doing. I gave her the standard answer. "Fine. Everything is fine." She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Elena, you look exhausted. You look like someone who has been holding her breath for years. When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" I could not answer her. I could not remember. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Listen to me carefully. You are allowed to take your space back. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to ask for your life back." I started to cry then, quiet tears that I wiped away quickly because I was afraid someone would see and think I was weak. But Denise did not let go of my hand. She just sat there with me while I cried. And when I finally stopped, she said, "What are you going to do about it?" That question haunted me for weeks. What was I going to do about it? I had spent so long being accommodating, being patient, being kind, that I had forgotten I had other options. I had forgotten that my kindness was supposed to be voluntary, not mandatory. I had forgotten that love without respect is just another word for suffering. And I was suffering. Every single day, I was suffering. But I did not know how to stop. I did not know how to unravel 5 years of patterns and expectations, and silent agreements that had never actually been agreed upon. Then came the day with the tea. The day Marcus poured my one small comfort down the sink and reminded me, in the clearest possible terms, that I did not matter. That my preferences were inconveniences. That my presence was tolerated, not valued. And something in me, something that had been compressed and compacted and pushed down for so long, finally expanded. Finally said, enough. I did not sleep that night, but it was not the restless kind of sleeplessness that had haunted me for months. The kind where I lay awake listening for footsteps, for raised voices, for the next small cruelty disguised as concern. This was different. This was the alert, focused wakefulness of a woman who had finally stopped asking for permission to reclaim her own life. I sat at the small desk I had moved into my bedroom and began making lists. Not frantic scribbles, but organized columns of action, phone numbers, legal steps, the architecture of independence. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, then 2, then 4, and I did not feel tired. I felt awake for the first time in years. At 7 in the morning, I called a locksmith. Not the chain store kind, but a small local company I had known about since Vincent and I first bought the house in 1981. The man who answered recognized my name immediately. "Mrs. Castellano," he said warmly. "It has been years. How can I help you?" "I need every lock changed by noon today," I said clearly. "Every door, front, back, side, new keys. No copies for anyone but me." There was a pause, professional and understanding. He had done this kind of job before. "I will be there by 9, he said. "Good." After I hung up, I made myself a cup of coffee, the first cup I had been able to enjoy in peace in months. I stood by the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard, at the garden I had neglected, at the fence that needed painting, at the small patio where Vincent and I used to sit in the evenings and talk about nothing important. I had let all of it go. I had let myself go. But not anymore. Today was the day I started taking myself back. At 7:30, I called my attorney, Jonathan Reeves, a man I had known professionally when I still worked at the county office. He handled property disputes, evictions, and the messy unraveling of living arrangements that had lasted too long. His assistant put me through immediately. "Elena," he said, his voice calm and exact. "What is going on?" I told him everything in 5 minutes. No dramatics, no tears, just facts. My daughter and son-in-law have lived in my house for 5 years, without a lease, without paying rent, without contribution. Yesterday, my son-in-law destroyed my property and made it clear I am no longer welcome in my own space. I want them legally removed. How long will it take? He exhaled slowly, the sound of a man calculating timelines against emotion. Arizona law is clear on this. They are not tenants. They are guests. You can withdraw permission at any time, but you must provide written notice. 30 days is standard to avoid complications. After that, if they refuse to leave, we file for eviction. 30 days, I repeated. Then what? Then the court compels them to vacate, and law enforcement can assist if necessary. But Elena, you need to be prepared for how your daughter will respond. This will not be easy on your relationship. My relationship with my daughter ended the moment she watched him pour my tea down the sink and said nothing, I replied. What I need now is my house back. Understood, he said. I will draft the notice today. You will need to serve it properly. I can arrange that. Do it, I said. And Jonathan, I want documentation of everything. Photos, receipts, records of what I have paid. If this goes to court, I want the truth to be undeniable. Consider it done. By the time I ended the call, the sun was higher, and I could hear movement in the rest of the house. The shower running, cabinets opening, the coffee machine grinding beans I had purchased with my grocery money. I stayed in my room and continued working. I pulled up my bank account on my laptop and began the process I had researched the night before. I removed Sophia's name from my checking account. I closed the supplementary credit card I had given her 3 years ago when Marcus claimed he was between contracts and they just needed a little help. I changed the password on every shared account. Utilities, internet, streaming services, all of it. Then I took a photograph of every room in the house, the furniture I had bought, the paintings I had hung, the floors I had refinished with Vincent before he died. Evidence. Truth, frozen in pixels. I also pulled up old receipts and bank statements, creating a comprehensive record of every expense I had covered over the past 5 years. Groceries, thousands of dollars. Utilities, thousands more. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, repairs. The numbers were staggering. I had spent over $90,000 supporting 2 adults who had contributed nothing. $90,000 that could have been invested, saved, used to travel or renovate, or simply provide me with security in my old age. Instead, it had been poured into a black hole of entitlement and ingratitude. I created a spreadsheet, organized by category and date, with scanned receipts attached as proof. I was not doing this out of bitterness, though I would have been justified in that. I was doing it because I knew Marcus would fight. I knew he would try to claim that he had contributed, that he had helped, that he had earned his place in my house. And when he did, I wanted to be able to present irrefutable evidence that he was lying. At 8:45, someone knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom?" Sophia's voice was cautious, muffled. "Are you okay? You have been in there all morning." "I am fine," I called back. "I am simply organizing some things." Pause. "Do you want breakfast?" Marcus made eggs. "No, thank you. I already ate." Another pause, longer this time. She was weighing whether to push further. She did not. I heard her footsteps retreat, and I exhaled. The locksmith arrived at 9:03. I met him outside and walked him around the perimeter of the house, showing him every entry point. He worked quickly and quietly, drilling and replacing, handing me each new key as he finished. I watched him work with a sense of satisfaction that surprised me. Each lock that changed was a small reclamation, a physical manifestation of the boundary I was setting. By 11:30, my house had a new skeleton, and I was the only one who could make it move. While he worked, I made another call. This one to the utility companies. I explained that I needed to confirm that all accounts were solely in my name, and that no one else had authorization to make changes or request services. I updated security questions. I added password protections. I made myself the single point of control for every service that kept the house running. If Marcus wanted electricity, water, internet, he would need my permission, and he was not going to get it. I also called my bank and added additional security measures to my accounts. I requested that any large withdrawals require verbal confirmation. I set up alerts for every transaction over $20. I wanted to know immediately if anyone tried to access my money. The representative on the phone was helpful and did not ask questions. She simply processed my requests with the efficiency of someone who had seen this before, who understood that sometimes protecting yourself required fortified walls. At noon, I walked into the living room where Marcus sat sprawled across the sectional sofa I had purchased on clearance 5 years ago. His laptop balanced on his thighs, earbuds in, completely unaware that the walls around him had just shifted. Sophia was folding laundry at the other end of the couch, her hands moving mechanically, her face blank in the way it always was when she was pretending everything was fine. I stood in the center of the room and waited until they both noticed me. Sophia looked up first, her brow furrowed. "Mom?" Marcus pulled out one earbud, annoyed at the interruption. "What?" "I need you both to sit down properly," I said. "This will only take a moment." Marcus rolled his eyes but did not move. Sophia set down the towel she was holding and straightened slightly, her body tensing in that familiar way that told me she knew something had changed but could not yet name it. I reached into the folder I carried and pulled out 2 envelopes, crisp and white, each labeled with a name. I handed one to Sophia, then placed the other on the armrest beside Marcus. "What is this?" Sophia asked, her voice thin. "Open it," I said. Her eyes scanned the first page, then froze. Her mouth opened slightly but no sound came. Marcus ripped his open with less care, yanking the paper out and reading with increasing speed. His face shifted from confusion to disbelief to anger in under 10 seconds. "Notice of termination of occupancy," he read aloud, his voice rising. "You are evicting us? You are kicking out your own daughter?" "I am withdrawing permission for you to live in my home," I corrected calmly. "You have 30 days to find other arrangements." "This is insane," Marcus barked, standing abruptly, the laptop tumbling onto the couch. "We have lived here for years. We have rights." "You have no rights," I said. "You have no lease. You pay no rent. You are occupants by my consent, and that consent has ended. Sophia finally found her voice, shaky and disbelieving. Mom, you cannot be serious. This is our home. This is my home, I replied, my voice even and firm. It has always been my home. I allowed you to stay, and now I am asking you to leave. Marcus stepped forward, his face red, his finger jabbing toward me. This is because of the tea, isn't it? Because I told you the truth yesterday? You are that petty? It is because you treated me like an inconvenience in my own kitchen, I said. It is because my daughter stood there and let you. It is because for 5 years, I have been erased one small moment at a time, and I am done disappearing. Marcus looked at Sophia, his expression shifting to something uglier, something calculating. Tell her, Sophia. Tell her this is cruel. Tell her she is going to regret this. Sophia stared at the paper in her hands, her fingers trembling. She looked at me with wet eyes and said, "We have nowhere to go." Then you have 30 days to figure it out, I said. I turned toward the hallway, then stopped and added one more thing. The locks have been changed. I will allow you supervised access to collect your belongings, but you no longer have free entry to this house. Do not test that boundary. Marcus's face went from red to purple. You changed the locks? You actually changed the locks? That is illegal. It is not illegal, I said calmly. I am the sole owner of this property. I can change my locks whenever I choose. But if you would like to discuss legality, I suggest you read the notice carefully. Everything I am doing is completely within my rights. You, on the other hand, have been living here for 5 years without contributing a single dollar. If anyone should be concerned about legality, it is you. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He was finally realizing that his usual tactics, intimidation, volume, accusation, were not going to work. I was not afraid of him. I was not going to be bullied. I had the law on my side, and more importantly, I had the truth. Sophia stood up, clutching the notice to her chest. Mom, please, can we just talk about this? Can we sit down and figure something out? There is nothing to figure out, I said gently but firmly. I have made my decision. You have 30 days. I suggest you use them wisely. I left him standing there, Marcus shouting behind me, Sophia crying softly, and closed myself back into my bedroom. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I had just set a fire I could not take back. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt warm. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community, so we can bring more truthful stories for you. I sat on the edge of my bed and let the adrenaline work its way through my system. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the sheer physical release of finally taking action. I had spent so long imagining this moment, rehearsing different versions of it in my mind during sleepless nights, wondering if I would have the courage when the time came. And I had done it. I had actually done it. The shouting continued in the living room for another 20 minutes. I could hear Marcus's voice rising and falling, sharp and accusatory, punctuated by Sophia's softer tones, trying to calm him down. At one point, something crashed, maybe a cup or a plate, and I tensed, wondering if I should call someone. But then the noise subsided, replaced by the sound of a door slamming, and I knew Marcus had left the house, probably to go drive around and fume, and call whoever would listen to his version of events. I used the quiet to continue my work. I called my insurance company and confirmed that only I was listed as the policyholder, and that no one else could make claims or changes without my direct authorization. I called my doctor's office and ensured that my medical information was secure, and that no one had access to my records without my written consent. I was building a fortress, brick by brick, protecting every aspect of my life that had been vulnerable to exploitation. Around 3 p.m, Sophia knocked on my door again. This time her voice was different, smaller, almost childlike. Mom, can I please come in? I need to talk to you. I opened the door. She stood there with red eyes and tear-stained cheeks, looking more fragile than I had seen her in years. I stepped aside and let her enter. She sat on the edge of my bed and folded her hands in her lap, her shoulders hunched forward. Why now? She asked quietly. Because yesterday was the last straw. I said, sitting beside her. Because I finally realized that waiting for things to get better was the same as accepting they would stay the same. Because I am 71 years old, and I do not have time to keep sacrificing myself for people who do not appreciate the sacrifice. She nodded slowly, tears dripping onto her hands. I know things have been hard. I know Marcus has not been easy to live with. But Mom, he is trying. He really is. He is just going through a difficult time. Sophia, I said gently, he has been going through a difficult time for 5 years. At what point does a difficult time become a character trait? That is not fair, she whispered. It is the truth, I replied, and I think deep down you know it is. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the conflict written across her face. The part of her that knew I was right, fighting with the part of her that was terrified to admit it. Mom, I do not know if I can leave him. I do not know if I am strong enough. You are stronger than you think, I said. You have just forgotten, because he has spent years convincing you otherwise. That is what people like Marcus do. They make you doubt yourself so completely that you become dependent on them for your sense of reality. But Sophia, you do not need him. You never did. She shook her head, crying harder now. But what if I cannot make it on my own? What if I fail? Then you fail, I said. And then you get up and try again. That is what life is. But at least you will be failing on your own terms, not his. At least you will be free. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I put my arm around her, and we sat like that for a long time, mother and daughter, bound by blood and history, and the complicated love that exists even when everything else is broken. When she finally pulled away, she wiped her eyes and said, I need to think about all of this. I need time. You have 30 days, I said. Use them however you need to. Just know that at the end of those 30 days, you both need to be gone. She nodded and stood up, moving toward the door. Before she left, she turned back and said, Do you hate me? My heart broke a little at the question. No, I said, I could never hate you. But I do not trust your judgment right now, and I cannot keep enabling choices that are destroying you. She nodded again and left, closing the door softly behind her. I sat alone in my room and let the weight of the day settle over me. I had done something irreversible. I had set a process in motion that would change my relationship with my daughter forever. But I had also done something necessary. I had chosen myself. And if that made me selfish in their eyes, so be it. I would rather be selfish and safe than generous and destroyed. The first 24 hours were the hardest, not because I doubted my decision, but because silence has a way of amplifying every sound you have been trying not to hear. I stayed in my room through the evening, listening to the muffled arguments seeping through the walls. Marcus's voice rose and fell in waves, words like abandonment and betrayal and unbelievable, crashing against Sophia's quieter responses, which I could not fully make out, but knew carried the tone of appeasement. She was soothing him. Even now, she was managing his anger, instead of questioning why it existed in the first place. Around 8 that evening, my phone began to ring. Sophia. I let it go to voicemail. She called again, then again. On the 4th attempt, I answered. Mom, please, she said immediately, her voice thick with tears. Please let us talk about this. We can fix this. There is nothing to fix, I said calmly. The notice has been served. The terms are clear. But we are family, she pleaded. Family does not do this to each other. Family does not stand by while someone pours your mother's tea down the sink, I replied. Family does not take and take and take without asking if the person giving has anything left. She was quiet for a moment. I heard Marcus's voice in the background, sharp and insistent, telling her what to say. She ignored him, which surprised me. Mom, I know things have been hard. I know Marcus can be difficult, but we are trying. We just need more time. Time to do what? I asked. Time to save money you are not earning? Time to respect me in ways you have not shown in 5 years? Sophia, you are 38 years old. You have a college degree and work experience. You are capable of taking care of yourself. You have simply chosen not to, because I made it too easy. That is not fair, she whispered. It is the truth, I said gently, and the kindest thing I can do now is stop enabling you to avoid it. I ended the call. She did not call back. That night I made a simple dinner for myself, soup and bread, and ate it at my kitchen table in silence. The house felt different already. Not lighter exactly, but less compressed. like a lung that had finally been allowed to expand. I washed my dish, set it in the rack to dry, and realized I had not checked over my shoulder once to see if someone was watching me with judgment or impatience. It was a small freedom, but it felt enormous. The next morning, I woke to find a note slipped under my bedroom door. It was from Sophia, handwritten on lined paper torn from a notebook. "Mom, I am sorry for everything. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. Please give us another chance. We will pay rent. We will help more. Just do not make us leave." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the lockbox with the deed. Words written in desperation were not the same as actions built on respect. I had learned that difference the hard way. I spent the morning cleaning my bedroom, really cleaning it, not the quick surface wipe I had been doing for years, but a deep, thorough purge. I pulled everything out of the closet and evaluated each item. Clothes I had not worn in years, books I would never read again, mementos from a version of my life that no longer existed. I filled 3 large bags with things to donate and carried them out to my car. The physical act of clearing space felt symbolic, necessary, like I was making room for whoever I was about to become. By day 3, Marcus tried a different approach. I was in the backyard watering the small garden I had neglected for months, too tired and too beaten down to care if the tomatoes lived or died, when he came outside and stood at the edge of the patio. His posture was different, less aggressive, almost contrite. "Castellano," he said, using my formal name for the first time in years. "Can we talk?" I continued watering, moving the hose in slow arcs across the dry soil. "You can talk. I will listen." He shifted his weight, hands in his pockets, eyes on the ground. "Look, I know I have not been the easiest person to live with. I have been under a lot of stress. Work has been unpredictable, and I have taken that out on people who did not deserve it. I am sorry." I kept watering. "Go on." He cleared his throat. "If you give us another chance, I promise things will be different. I will respect your space. I will contribute financially. I will make this work." I turned off the hose and finally looked at him fully. "Marcus, do you know why I'm doing this?" He hesitated, then said, "Because I disrespected you? Because you disrespected me and my daughter allowed it. Because for 5 years, you have lived in my house without contributing a single dollar toward rent, utilities, or groceries. Because you have treated me like a burden in my own home. And because apologies mean nothing without accountability." He stiffened slightly, the mask slipping. "I have been looking for work," he said defensively. "The market is tough." "You have been saying that for 5 years, I replied. "At some point, Marcus, the market is not the problem. Your choices are." His jaw tightened. "So that is it? You are just going to throw us out? No second chance? No understanding?" "I am giving you 30 days, I said. "That is more understanding than you gave me yesterday when you decided my tea was not worth the space it took up." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact second he realized I was not going to bend. The softness in his expression curdled into something colder. "But do not expect Sophia to forgive you for this." "I do not need her forgiveness," I said. "I need her to grow up." He walked back inside, and I returned to my tomatoes. They were drooping, but not dead. There was still time. Over the next several days, I continued to fortify my position. I contacted a local storage facility and rented a unit, then began moving items of value, sentimental importance, or financial worth into that space. Vincent's tools, my grandmother's china, photo albums, important documents, anything I could not risk being damaged or taken in the chaos of their departure. I worked methodically, 1 box at a time, labeling everything clearly so I would know exactly where things were when I eventually brought them back. I also reached out to my neighbors, the ones I had lost touch with over the years, because I had been too embarrassed to socialize, too afraid they would see how diminished I had become. I knocked on doors and reintroduced myself, explained that there might be some disruption over the next few weeks, asked them to keep an eye out and call me if they noticed anything unusual. They were kind and understanding, and several of them admitted they had been concerned about me, but did not know how to approach the subject. One neighbor, a retired teacher named Lillian who lived 3 houses down, pulled me aside and said quietly, "I have seen how that man treats you. I have seen how he parks in front of your house like he owns it, how he talks to you on the driveway. I have been worried. I am taking care of it, I told her. Good, she said firmly. You deserve better. If you need anything, anything at all, you come to me. Her support meant more than I could express. By the end of the first week, the dynamics in the house had shifted into something strange and tense. Marcus and Sophia moved around me like I was a ghost, present but not acknowledged. They spoke to each other in low voices that cut off when I entered a room. They made their own meals and ate them in their bedroom. The shared spaces became neutral zones where we passed each other without eye contact, without words, like strangers in a hotel hallway. I did not mind. The silence was not hostile. It was simply honest. On day 9, I received a call from Jonathan Reeves. Elena, we need to talk about something. His tone was careful, which immediately put me on alert. What happened? Your son-in-law filed a complaint with Adult Protective Services. I sat down slowly. He did what? He filed a report claiming you are being financially exploited and that you are not mentally competent to make decisions about your living arrangements. He is trying to paint you as a vulnerable senior being manipulated. For a moment, I could not speak. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Marcus, who had lived off my income for 5 years, was now claiming I was the one being exploited. I am 71, not incapacitated, I said finally, my voice hard. And I have documentation proving every financial decision I have made has been sound and independent. I know, Jonathan said. That is why I am not worried. But you will need to meet with a caseworker. They are required to investigate. When? Tomorrow afternoon. I will be there with you. Good, I said. Let them investigate. Let them see exactly who has been taking advantage of whom. I spent the rest of that day preparing. I printed additional copies of all my financial records, organized them into a binder with tabs and labels, created a timeline of Marcus and Sophia's stay, with annotations showing every major expense I had covered. I pulled my medical records from the past 2 years, showing regular checkups, normal cognitive function, no signs of dementia or impairment. I drafted a written statement explaining the situation in clear, factual language. By the time I finished, I had created a document so thorough that no reasonable person could question my competence. The caseworker arrived the next day at 2 p.m, a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a clipboard that had seen better days. Her name was Angela Moreno, and she introduced herself with a firm handshake and an apologetic smile. Mrs. Castellano, I am here because a concern was raised about your well-being. I need to ask you some questions, and I want you to know you can answer honestly. No one here will judge you. I nodded and led her into the living room. Jonathan sat beside me, his briefcase open, documents already organized. Sophia and Marcus were not home. I had made sure of that by scheduling the meeting during Sophia's work hours and confirming Marcus had a so-called job interview across town. Angela asked me about my health, my finances, my daily routines. She asked if anyone was pressuring me to make decisions I did not want to make. She asked if I felt safe. I answered every question calmly, clearly, and with the precision of someone who had spent decades working in bureaucracy. Then I handed her the binder. Inside were bank statements showing my financial independence, medical records confirming my cognitive health, and a signed letter from my personal physician stating I was fully competent. I also included photographs of the house, dated and labeled, showing that I maintained my own space and property. I included the itemized list of expenses I had covered over 5 years, totaling over $90,000. This is very thorough, Angela said, scanning the pages. Most people do not come this prepared. I worked in public records for 34 years, I said. I know how systems work. And I know that men like my son-in-law use those systems to intimidate women when they stop being convenient. She looked up at me, something shifting in her expression, understanding. Mrs. Castellano, based on what I am seeing here, there is no evidence of exploitation or incompetence. In fact, it appears you have been the primary financial provider for your household, and that your decision to terminate their occupancy is both reasonable and legally sound. That is correct, I said, and now I am choosing to stop. That is your right, she said simply. She closed her folder and stood. I will file my report today. You should not hear anything further from my office. However, I do want to give you this. She handed me a brochure for a legal aid organization that specialized in elder rights and housing disputes, just in case. Thank you, I said. After she left, Jonathan leaned back in his chair and smiled faintly. You handled that perfectly. I have had practice, I replied. The question is, what will Marcus do next? We did not have to wait long for the answer. That evening, I was preparing dinner when Sophia came home early, her face pale and her hands shaking. She walked into the kitchen and stood across from me, gripping the counter like it was the only thing holding her upright. Mom, she said quietly, did you really have someone from APS investigate us? I kept chopping vegetables, my movements steady. I did not. Marcus did. He filed a false report claiming I was being exploited. The caseworker came to verify I was competent. I am. She blinked, absorbing that. He told me it was just a precaution, that he was worried about you. He lied, I said, setting down the knife and looking at her directly. He tried to use the system to make me look unstable so he could undermine my decision to evict you. It failed. Sophia's face crumpled. I did not know. I swear, Mom, I did not know he was going to do that. But you have known everything else, I said quietly. You've known how he speaks to me. You've known how he treats this house. You've chosen him anyway. She covered her face with her hands and started to cry, deep shaking sobs that came from somewhere old and buried. I am sorry, she choked out. I am so sorry. I did not know how to stop it. You stop it by saying no, I said gently. You stop it by choosing yourself. She looked at me through tears, and for the first time in years, I saw my daughter, not the woman who had folded herself into someone else's expectations, but the girl who used to believe she could do anything. I do not know how, she whispered. Yes, you do, I said. You just have not tried yet. That night, Sophia slept on the couch. Marcus slept alone in their bedroom. And I lay in mine, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was the beginning of her waking up, or just another moment she would forget by morning. Only time would tell, but I had done my part. I had held the line. The rest was up to her. By the middle of the second week, something unexpected happened. Sophia stopped defending Marcus. She did not announce it. She did not sit me down and deliver some grand revelation. She simply stopped. I noticed it first in the small things. When Marcus complained loudly about the internet being too slow, Sophia did not rush to fix it or apologize on behalf of the service provider. She kept folding laundry. When he asked her why dinner was not ready yet, she replied flatly, I just got home. You have been here all day. He stared at her like she had grown a second head, but she did not take it back. She just walked past him into the kitchen. I watched this shift with cautious curiosity, not hope, because hope in these situations can be a trap that keeps you looking for signs instead of trusting patterns. But something had cracked. I could see it in the way Sophia carried herself, less hunched, less apologetic. She stopped asking me if I was okay every 5 minutes, stopped trying to smooth over the tension with forced cheerfulness. She simply existed in the house, the way someone does when they are too tired to perform anymore. On day 16, she knocked on my bedroom door around 9 in the evening. I was reading, my glasses perched on my nose, a cup of chamomile tea steaming on the nightstand. Come in, I called. She opened the door slowly and stood in the doorway, not entering fully, as if she was still asking permission for everything. Can we talk? She asked. Of course. Sit. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded tightly in her lap, and for a long moment, she said nothing. I waited. I had learned over the decades that silence was often the only tool that worked when words had been used up. I looked at our bank account today, she said finally, the joint one Marcus and I share. Her voice was flat, almost detached. There is nothing in it. I did not react. He told me he was putting money aside from the freelance work he has been doing. I believed him. She laughed bitterly, a sound with no humor in it. There is no freelance work, Mom. There is no savings. There is $23, and a string of transfers to some trading account I have never heard of. I set my book down carefully. Did you ask him about it? She nodded, tears pooling but not falling. He said it was an investment, that it was going to pay off big, that I just needed to trust him. He has been saying that for 3 years. 3 years, Mom. And I just kept believing him, because it was easier than admitting I married someone who lies to my face. The tears fell then, slow and quiet. I reached over and took her hand. It was cold. Sophia, what do you want to do? She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. I do not know. Then let me tell you what I see, I said gently but firmly. I see a man who has spent 5 years living off my generosity and your denial. I see someone who does not respect you, who does not contribute, and who has now financially endangered you by gambling with money you thought was secure. And I see my daughter, who is strong and capable, sitting here asking me for permission to save herself. I am not asking for permission, she whispered. Yes, you are, I said, and I am giving it to you. You do not need to stay with him. You do not need to fix him. You are allowed to choose yourself. She squeezed my hand tightly and nodded, but she did not say anything else. She just sat there for a while, breathing, thinking, becoming. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the door and said quietly, "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I never gave up on you," I replied. The next morning, I woke to the sound of drawers opening and closing rapidly in the other bedroom. I got dressed and walked into the hallway. Sophia's door was open. She was packing. Not everything, just clothes, toiletries, her laptop. She moved with focus, not frantic but determined, the way you do when you have finally made a decision and your body is relieved to have direction. Marcus was nowhere in sight. "Where is he?" I asked from the doorway. "Job interview," she said without looking up. Or whatever he actually does when he says he has job interviews. I am not waiting to find out. "Where are you going?" "My friend Casey has a spare room. I called her last night. She said I can stay as long as I need." I felt something loosen in my chest, something I had been holding tight for years. "That is good, Sophia. That is really good." She stopped packing and looked at me, her face calm but sad. I nodded. "What matters is that you are doing it now." She zipped the suitcase and pulled it off the bed. It hit the floor with a heavy thump. "I am still scared," she admitted. "That is okay," I said. "Brave does not mean unafraid. It just means you move anyway." She smiled faintly, a real smile, the first I had seen in months. "I will call you when I get settled." "Good." "And Sophia?" She turned back. "File for divorce. Do not wait. Do not let him talk you into another chance. He has had 5 years of chances." Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. "I know." She walked out the front door with her suitcase rolling behind her. And I stood at the window and watched her car pull away. The house was quieter without her. But it was a different kind of quiet. The kind that comes after a storm passes. Marcus returned 2 hours later. I heard his keys scrape against the lock. Fail. Try again. Fail. Then the pounding started. "Sophia, open the door." He pounded again. "Sophia." I walked calmly to the front door and stood on the other side, not opening it. "She is not here," I called through the wood. "What? Where is she?" "She left, and her key does not work because you do not live here anymore." There was a beat of stunned silence, then an explosion. "You cannot keep me out. My stuff is in there." "Your belongings will be inventoried and made available for pickup at a scheduled time," I said evenly. "You do not have access to this house." "This is insane," he shouted. "I am calling the police." "Go ahead," I replied. "I will show them the eviction notice and the new locks I legally installed. You are trespassing." The pounding stopped. I heard him breathing hard on the other side, fury barely contained. "You are a vindictive old woman," he spat. "No," I said quietly. "I am just a woman who stopped letting you steal from her." He kicked the door once, hard enough to rattle the frame. Then I heard his footsteps retreat. A car door slammed. An engine started. He was gone. I locked the deadbolt, checked the windows, and returned to my tea. My hands were steady. The days that followed took on a strange rhythm. Without Sophia as a buffer, and without access to the house, Marcus's attempts to control the situation became increasingly desperate and transparent. He called my phone repeatedly. I did not answer. He sent text messages, ranging from apologetic to threatening. I screenshotted each one and forwarded them to Jonathan. He showed up at odd hours and stood outside the gate, shouting demands and accusations. I called the police the first time, filed a report for harassment, and obtained a copy for my records. The second time he showed up, I simply stayed inside, and let him yell himself hoarse. Neighbors watched from their windows, witnesses to his unraveling. On day 23, Jonathan called. Marcus filed a counterclaim. He is arguing that because he has lived there for 5 years, he has established residency, and you cannot evict him without cause. I closed my eyes briefly. Can he win? No, Jonathan said firmly. He has no lease. You have documented evidence that he contributed nothing financially. Arizona law is on your side, but it will delay things slightly. The hearing is set for next month. Good, I said. Let him waste his money on a lawyer. I have time. But there was one more thing I needed to do, something I had been avoiding because it required a kind of honesty I had not been ready for. I needed to speak to Sophia, not as her mother offering advice, but as one woman to another, sharing the truth I wished someone had told me decades ago. I called her that evening. She answered on the second ring. Hey, Mom. Hey, sweetheart. How are you doing? She sighed. It is hard. Casey has been amazing, but I feel like I am starting over from scratch. I do not even know where to begin. Begin with the truth, I said. Tell yourself the truth about what happened, about who he is, about what you ignored because it was easier. Write it down if you have to. Once you see it clearly, the next steps become obvious. There was a pause. Then she said, I have been doing that actually, writing things down. It is worse than I thought, Mom. Worse how? She hesitated. He opened credit cards in my name, 3 of them. I just found out yesterday, all maxed out. My stomach dropped. How much? I sat down slowly, the weight of it pressing into my chest. Sophia, you need to report that as fraud. He is your husband. It does not matter. If he did not have your permission, it is fraud. You need to protect yourself legally. I know, she said, her voice small. I have an appointment with a lawyer next week. Good, I said. And Sophia, I need you to hear this. None of this is your fault. You were manipulated by someone who knew exactly how to exploit your kindness. That does not make you weak. It makes you human. She started to cry softly. I should have listened to you. You were not ready to listen, I said gently. But you are now. That is what matters. We talked for another hour, about lawyers and credit reports and restraining orders, about how to rebuild when everything feels broken, about the strange relief that comes when you finally stop pretending. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my house and felt something I had not felt in years. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but the deep, steady peace of knowing I had done the right thing, even when it hurt. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community, so we can bring more truthful stories for you. On day 29, Marcus showed up one last time before the hearing. It was early evening, the sky turning that particular shade of purple that only desert sunsets manage, the kind that makes the mountains look like they are glowing from within. I was in the backyard again, tending to the garden that was finally starting to recover, small green shoots pushing through soil that had been neglected for too long. I heard the gate rattle and turned to see him standing there, hands shoved in his pockets, looking smaller somehow, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size, and everything to do with the collapse of the persona he had built. I straightened and waited, trowel in hand, dirt under my fingernails. He did not come closer. The gate remained between us, a physical boundary that matched the emotional one I had constructed. I just wanted to say, he started, then stopped. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he could not swallow. What? I prompted, my voice neutral. That you were right. About me. I did not respond. I just watched him, waiting to see if this was genuine or another manipulation. I have been lying to myself for a long time, he continued, his voice lacking its usual confidence. About the money, about the work, about a lot of things. And I took that out on you because you were there and because you let me. I still did not speak. He shifted uncomfortably, looking at the ground rather than at me. I am not asking for forgiveness. I just thought you should know that I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. That consequences are not cruelty. They are clarity. I sat down on the garden bench, phone in my pocket in case this turned into something I needed to document, and let his words settle in the cooling air. Marcus, I said finally, I am glad you are getting help, truly. But you are right. I do not forgive you. Not because I am holding a grudge, but because forgiveness is not something you are owed. It is something that might come in time, or it might not. What matters is that you are taking responsibility. Keep doing that. Not for me. Not for Sophia. For yourself. I understand, he said quietly. Thank you for taking my call. You are standing at my gate, I corrected, and you should leave now before I document this as another violation of boundaries. He nodded once, a defeated gesture, and turned to walk away. Before he disappeared around the corner, he paused and said without turning back, Sophia deserves better than who I was. I hope she finds it. Then he was gone. I sat in the garden for a long time after that, watching the light fade and the first stars appear in the darkening sky. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel vindicated. I felt tired but clean, like someone who had finished a difficult job and could finally rest. I returned to my flowers and finished planting them, pressing the soil down firmly around each root system, giving them the strong foundation they needed to grow. The hearing took place 4 days later in a small courtroom that smelled like old paperwork, air conditioning, and the particular kind of institutional anxiety that accumulates in places where people's lives are decided by strangers in robes. I arrived early with Jonathan, my documents in a neat folder, my outfit carefully chosen to project competence and clarity. A simple navy dress, pearls that had been my mother's, comfortable shoes, because I refused to sacrifice stability for appearance. Marcus sat across the aisle, with a lawyer who looked young and overworked, the kind of public defender who handles 30 cases at once and cannot give any of them the attention they deserve. Marcus himself looked diminished in his ill-fitting suit, his hair uncombed, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he had not been sleeping well. I felt no sympathy. He had made his choices. Now he was living with them. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense, reviewed the case quickly, flipping through pages with the efficiency of someone who had seen this exact scenario 100 times before. Mr. Brennan, she said, looking over her glasses, you are arguing that you have established residency and cannot be evicted without cause. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, his lawyer said, standing. My client has lived at the property for 5 years and has made it his primary residence. He has received mail there, registered vehicles to that address, and integrated himself into the household. We believe that constitutes tenancy by implication, and that the owner's sudden demand for him to vacate without proper cause violates his rights. The judge turned to me, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Castellano, you are the sole owner of the property, correct? Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Brennan has no lease, pays no rent, and is not listed on the deed? That is correct. The judge looked back at Marcus. Mr. Brennan, do you have any documentation showing financial contribution to the property? Utilities, repairs, rent payments, anything? His lawyer hesitated, shuffling papers. We are arguing that his presence and cohabitation with the owner's daughter constitute contribution. He provided emotional support, household assistance, and companionship. The judge's expression did not change, but I saw the faintest flicker of incredulity cross her features. Emotional support is not rent, Counselor. Do you have financial documentation or not? The lawyer swallowed hard. No, Your Honor, we do not. But we would like to present testimony about the verbal agreements made when my client moved in, about the understanding that this was to be a permanent living arrangement. The judge held up her hand. Stop. She turned to me. Mrs. Castellano, did you ever tell Mr. Brennan that he could live in your house permanently? No, Your Honor. My daughter asked if they could stay temporarily while they got back on their feet. I agreed to that. I never agreed to a permanent arrangement, and I certainly never agreed to support 2 adults indefinitely without any contribution from them. Did you ever sign any document granting him tenancy or ownership rights? No, Your Honor. Jonathan stood then, his movements calm and practiced. Your Honor, if I may, we have extensive documentation showing that Mrs. Castellano has paid 100% of all household expenses for the past 5 years. Property taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance, groceries. Mr. Brennan has contributed nothing. We also have documentation showing that Mrs. Castellano provided written notice of termination of occupancy 30 days prior to this hearing, which exceeds the legal requirement for guests and occupants without leases. He slid the binder across to the judge. She opened it and began reviewing the contents, her eyes moving quickly over bank statements, receipts, the itemized list of expenses. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she reached the total. $93,000 over 5 years, she said, looking at Marcus. You lived rent-free and expense-free for 5 years while the homeowner, a 71-year-old woman on a fixed income, covered everything. Marcus shifted in his seat. I was looking for work. The economy was difficult. For 5 years? The judge asked, her tone sharpening. Mr. Brennan, I have been on the bench for 18 years. I have seen many cases like this. Adult children and their partners moving in with elderly parents, promising it is temporary, then treating the parents' home like a free hotel while showing no respect and no gratitude. What I see here is a clear case of financial exploitation disguised as family support. She closed the binder and looked directly at Marcus. You have no lease. You have paid no rent. You have contributed nothing financially. Mrs. Castellano has every legal right to withdraw her permission for you to occupy her property. The notice was properly served. The time frame was more than adequate. Your argument about established residency is without merit, because you have never had a legal basis for residency in the first place. She signed something with a quick, decisive flourish. Eviction granted. Brennan, you have 72 hours to vacate the property and remove all personal belongings. Any belongings left after that time will be considered abandoned and may be disposed of by the property owner. Furthermore, I am ordering you to pay court costs. Mrs. Castellano should not have to spend money to remove someone who should have left voluntarily months ago. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the small courtroom. Court adjourned. Marcus sat frozen, his face pale, his lawyer whispering something urgent in his ear that he did not seem to hear. I stood, gathered my folder, and walked out without looking back, Jonathan following close behind. Outside, the Phoenix sun was blinding and hot and unforgiving, pressing down on my shoulders like a weight I was finally strong enough to carry. How do you feel? Jonathan asked as we walked to the parking lot. Tired, I said, but free. You did good, Elena. You did what a lot of people do not have the courage to do. I looked at him, this man who had helped me navigate the law with patience and precision, who had treated my case with the seriousness it deserved. Thank you, Jonathan, for everything. He nodded. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me. I drove home slowly, windows down, the hot air rushing in and clearing out the last remnants of doubt and fear and uncertainty. When I pulled into my driveway and saw my house, standing solid and quiet in the afternoon light, I felt something click into place deep inside my chest. I was home. Really home. For the first time in 5 years, I was truly home. Jonathan arranged for a professional moving company to assist with Marcus's belongings, ensuring everything was documented and that there could be no claims later of stolen or damaged property. I was not present for most of it, choosing instead to spend those days at Lillian's house, drinking tea and playing cards and letting someone else deal with the logistics of extraction. When I finally returned on the 4th day, the house was empty of Marcus's presence. His clothes were gone, his electronics were gone, the desk he had commandeered was cleared. The master bedroom stood vacant, waiting to be reclaimed. I walked through each room slowly, taking inventory not just of what was missing, but of what remained. The bones of my life, the structure I had built with Vincent, the home I had almost lost. I spent the next week in a cleaning frenzy that would have impressed even the most dedicated homemaker. I scrubbed every surface. I washed every curtain and sheet. I steam cleaned the carpets. I opened every window and let the desert air blow through, carrying out the residue of anger and resentment and years of accumulated tension. I hired painters and chose colors I had always wanted, but never suggested because someone else might not like them. The living room became a soft sage green that reminded me of the desert after rain. The kitchen became a warm, buttery yellow that caught the morning light and held it like a promise. My bedroom, which I moved back into the master suite, became lavender, soothing and gentle, and entirely mine. The guest room, the one I had been relegated to for so long, I turned into an office, a space dedicated to the projects I had abandoned when caregiving and accommodating had swallowed all my time. I replaced the furniture Marcus had claimed. The sectional sofa went to a donation center. and in its place I bought 2 armchairs that faced each other, designed for conversation, not domination. I hung new artwork, pieces from local artists that reflected the desert I loved, the strength of bent trees and blooming cacti that thrived despite the harshness around them. I put up photographs of my life before the erasure began, images of Vincent and me when we were young, pictures of Sophia as a little girl before she learned to shrink herself, memories of a version of our family that had known joy. But the most significant change was not visible to anyone who might visit. It was internal, foundational, a reconstruction of the self I had let crumble. I began setting boundaries in every area of my life, not just with Sophia or Marcus, but with everyone. When my sister called and asked me to babysit her grandchildren for the 4th weekend in a row, I said no. Not because I did not love the children, but because I had learned that love without limits becomes obligation, and obligation without choice becomes resentment. When a neighbor assumed I would continue to water her plants while she vacationed for 3 weeks, I said it did not work for me this time. When a telemarketer refused to accept my first refusal, I hung up without guilt. When a charity called for the 3rd time in a week, I politely but firmly asked to be removed from their list. These small acts of self-respect accumulated like interest in an account I had neglected for decades. I was becoming wealthy in ways that had nothing to do with money. Sophia's divorce proceedings moved slowly, as these things do when one party refuses to accept reality. Marcus contested everything, dragging out the process with baseless claims and emotional appeals that the court saw through quickly. He tried to argue for spousal support, claiming he had sacrificed his career to support Sophia emotionally during difficult times. The judge reviewed the financial records, showing that Sophia had been the sole income earner throughout their marriage, and denied the request. He tried to claim half of Sophia's retirement account, arguing that they had built their life together, and he was entitled to share in all assets. Her lawyer presented evidence that not only had he contributed nothing to her retirement account, but he had actively sabotaged her financial security by opening credit cards in her name without permission. Request denied. He tried to claim he deserved compensation for household labor and emotional support. The judge looked at him with the kind of tired patience reserved for people who have wasted everyone's time, and said, "Mr. Brennan, marriage is not a job with a salary." Case closed. By the time the divorce was finalized 8 months later, Sophia had moved into her own apartment, a small 1-bedroom near her office that she furnished piece by piece with things she chose herself. She called me one Saturday afternoon and asked if I wanted to come see it. I drove over with a housewarming gift, a set of good knives and a cast-iron skillet, the tools every woman needs to feed herself well, wrapped in paper I had chosen carefully, because the small gestures mattered now in ways they had not before. When she opened the door, I saw it immediately. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, styled in a way that framed her face instead of hiding it. She wore jeans and a simple shirt, no makeup, no performance. She looked like herself, like the version of Sophia I had always known existed beneath the layers of accommodation and fear. The apartment was tiny but bright, filled with afternoon sunlight that streamed through large windows she had left uncovered because she liked waking up with the sun. She had painted one wall a deep teal and hung floating shelves filled with books and plants, small green things she was learning to keep alive. There was a small table by the window where she took her coffee in the mornings, a ritual she had reclaimed as her own, a yoga mat rolled up in the corner, a laptop open on the couch, with a budget spreadsheet visible on the screen, columns of numbers that represented her new life, organized and intentional and entirely under her control. "This is beautiful," I said, and I meant it. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. "It is mine," she said simply. "That is what makes it beautiful." We sat at her little table and drank tea from mismatched mugs she had picked up at a thrift store, and she told me about her life. She had been promoted at work, a recognition of the effort she had been putting in for years that had gone unnoticed because she had been too drained to advocate for herself, too busy managing Marcus's moods to focus on her own advancement. She had started seeing a therapist who specialized in financial abuse and coercive relationships, a woman who was helping her understand that what she had experienced was not normal marital difficulty but systematic manipulation designed to keep her dependent and compliant. She had opened a new bank account at a different institution, changed all her passwords to things Marcus would never guess, and checked her credit report every week, watching the fraudulent accounts slowly disappear as she disputed them one by one. She was rebuilding her financial life from the ground up, and though it was slow and sometimes frustrating, she was doing it. She had created a debt repayment plan. She had started contributing to her retirement account again. She had cut up the last credit card that bore any connection to Marcus. She was learning to live within her means, to distinguish between wants and needs, to find satisfaction in small, affordable pleasures, rather than expensive distractions. "What about Marcus?" I asked carefully. "Have you heard from him?" She shook her head. He tried to contact me through mutual friends a few times, sending messages through them asking if I would meet him for coffee, telling them he had changed, that he was in therapy, that he wanted to apologize properly. I told them all the same thing. I am not interested in his apologies. I am interested in my peace. "Good," I said, pride warming my chest. She looked at me then, her expression serious and vulnerable in a way it had not been in years. "Mom, I need to say something. I have needed to say it for a while now. Go ahead." "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion underneath. "Thank you for not letting me get away with the lies I was telling myself. Thank you for being harsh when I needed harshness. Thank you for showing me what it looks like to choose yourself, even when it costs you everything." I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling the strength in her grip that had not been there before. "It did not cost me everything," I said. "It gave me everything back." We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about lighter things, about books we were reading and recipes we wanted to try, and the small daily victories of living alone. When I left, driving back through the Phoenix streets as the sun began to set, I felt something I had not felt in years. Hope. Not the naive kind that expects everything to be easy, but the grounded kind that knows struggle is part of growth, and that surviving the struggle makes you stronger. My daughter was going to be all right, and so was I. As the months turned into a year, my Wednesday group continued to grow in ways I had never anticipated. What had started as informal gatherings in my living room had evolved into something more structured and intentional. Women brought their friends, their mothers, their sisters, their coworkers. We talked about boundaries and self-worth, and the quiet violence of being made to feel like you are too much and not enough at the same time. We shared strategies for financial independence, for documentation, for finding lawyers and therapists and support systems. We created a resource list of local organizations that could help with everything from housing to legal aid to job training. We practiced saying no, actually role-playing difficult conversations until the words felt natural, instead of terrifying. We celebrated small victories, like opening a separate bank account or telling an adult child they could not move back home, or standing up to a partner who had been taking advantage for years. One evening, a woman named Lorraine, who was 76 and had been caring for her adult son for 15 years, while he drained her savings and dismissed her concerns, stood up in the middle of our meeting and said with a voice that shook but did not break, "I am done. I am evicting him next week." The room erupted in applause, not because we celebrated family separation, but because we recognized the courage it took to choose yourself after decades of choosing everyone else. We helped her draft the notice, walking her through every line and explaining what each section meant. We connected her with Jonathan, who agreed to handle her case. We showed up at her house the day her son moved out, not to gloat or to judge, but to stand as witnesses to her reclamation, to let her know she was not alone. When it was over, she cried in my arms and said, "I did not think I had it in me." "You always had it in you," I told her, holding her steady. "You just needed permission to use it." These stories multiplied, spreading through networks of women who recognized themselves in each other's experiences. Women who had been told they were selfish for wanting space, unreasonable for expecting respect, cold for refusing to be used. They came to my living room and learned that they were none of those things. They were simply human beings who had been conditioned to believe their needs came last, and we were reconditioning ourselves one meeting at a time. I also reconnected with parts of myself I had buried under years of accommodation. I started painting again, setting up an easel in my new office, and losing myself in color and texture and the meditative process of creating something from nothing. I was not good at it, not in any technical sense, but that was not the point. The point was the act itself, the claiming of time and space for something that served no purpose beyond my own pleasure. I joined a hiking group that met every Saturday morning, a collection of women in their 60s and 70s who walked the desert trails I had admired from a distance for too long. We moved slowly, stopping often to catch our breath and point out wildflowers or lizards, or the way the light fell across the rocks. We did not talk much during the hikes, saving our breath for the climb, but we always had coffee afterward, sitting in the shade and sharing stories that ranged from profound to ridiculous. I went to the theater alone and did not feel strange about it, buying a single ticket to matinee performances and sitting in the middle of a row without having to worry about whether someone else was enjoying themselves. I traveled to Santa Fe for a long weekend, wandering art galleries and eating at restaurants I chose spontaneously, following my curiosity without checking my phone every 5 minutes to make sure no one needed me. I was 71 years old, and I was finally learning how to be free. Not free from responsibility, because I still had obligations and commitments and people I cared about, but free from the belief that my value was determined by my usefulness to others. Free to be imperfect, to be selfish, to be unavailable, free to take up space without apologizing for it. One afternoon, nearly 18 months after I had evicted Marcus and Sophia, I was in my backyard planting new flowers, my hands deep in the rich soil I had amended with compost and nutrients, when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something told me to answer. "Hello, Mrs. Castellano? This is Marcus." I froze, trowel in hand, dirt under my fingernails, the sun hot on the back of my neck. I did not respond immediately, taking time to center myself and decide how I wanted to handle this. "Why are you calling me?" "I am not supposed to contact Sophia, but I wanted you to know something." I waited, my silence a boundary he could not cross without my permission. "I got help," he said, his voice different than I remembered, quieter, less performed. "I have been in therapy for 6 months, the kind where they do not let you make excuses or blame other people. I joined a financial recovery program where I had to account for every dollar I spent and every debt I created. I got a job, a real one, not freelance nonsense, working in warehouse management. The pay is not great, but it is honest. I am paying back the debt I created, slowly, but I am doing it. I am not calling to ask for anything. I do not expect you to care. I just wanted you to know that what you did, kicking me out, forcing me to face what I had become, it saved my life. I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not deserve that. But I needed you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. That consequences are not cruelty, they are clarity." I sat down on the garden bench, phone pressed to my ear, and let his words settle in the warm afternoon air. Birds sang in the tree above me. The scent of jasmine drifted from somewhere nearby. The world continued, indifferent to this small moment of potential reconciliation. "Marcus," I said finally, "I am glad you are getting help. Truly. But you are right, I do not forgive you. Not because I am holding a grudge, but because forgiveness is not something you are owed. It is something that might come in time, or it might not. What matters is that you are taking responsibility. Keep doing that, not for me, not for Sophia, for yourself." "I understand," he said quietly. "Thank you for taking my call." I hung up without saying goodbye, because I did not owe him closure, did not owe him the comfort of a neat ending. I returned to my flowers and finished planting them, pressing the soil down firmly around each delicate root system, giving them the strong foundation they needed to grow and bloom and eventually fade, completing the cycle that all living things must complete. That evening I called Sophia and told her about the conversation. She listened without interrupting, the way she had learned to do in therapy, creating space for information before reacting to it. "How do you feel about it?" she asked when I finished. "I feel nothing," I said, "and that is exactly how it should be." She laughed softly, a sound that held relief and recognition. "You are free of him, Mom, completely free." "So are you," I reminded her. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a certainty it had lacked for years. As my second year of reclaimed life came to a close, I realized I had accidentally created something larger than myself, something that would continue long after I was gone. The Wednesday group had become a network that extended far beyond my living room. Women who met here started hosting their own gatherings in their cities, their their neighborhoods, their communities, creating satellite circles of support and truth-telling. They called it the Elena Project, which made me laugh the first time I heard it, because I had never intended to be anyone's symbol or role model. I was just a woman who got tired of disappearing. But they insisted, sending me letters and emails explaining that my story had given them permission to write their own. "You showed us it was possible," one woman wrote from Minnesota. "You proved that it is never too late to take your life back." I received letters from across the country, from Canada, from women who had somehow found my story through the networks we were building. From women in their 80s who had finally left abusive marriages after 60 years. From daughters who had stopped funding their parents' destructive habits. From mothers who had set boundaries with adult children who treated them like ATMs. From sisters who had learned to say no to siblings who only called when they needed money. Each story was different in its details, but the same in its theme. We stopped disappearing. We started choosing ourselves. And the world did not end. It began. I framed one letter and hung it in my hallway, where I would see it every day. It was from a woman in Michigan who wrote in careful handwriting on lined paper, "You taught me that love without respect is just another word for suffering. Thank you for giving me the language to name what I was feeling and the courage to change it." I read it every morning as I walked to the kitchen, a reminder of why the discomfort and confrontation and painful boundary setting had been worth it. On the 2-year anniversary of the day Marcus poured my tea down the sink, the day that had become in my mind the dividing line between who I had been and who I was becoming, I hosted a celebration. Not a party exactly, but a gathering of gratitude. Women from the group came, some I knew well and had worked with closely, others I had only met once or twice, but who considered themselves part of this accidental movement we had created. We filled my house with laughter and food and stories, potluck dishes that represented our diverse backgrounds and histories. The peach walls I had chosen glowed warm in the afternoon light. The armchairs I had selected were occupied by women deep in conversation. My kitchen, the site of so much quiet suffering, now rang with the sounds of community and connection. Sophia came too, bringing her new partner, a woman named Iris, who worked as a teacher and treated my daughter like she was someone worth listening to, someone whose thoughts and feelings and preferences mattered. They held hands under the table during dinner, and I felt a swell of pride so strong it brought tears to my eyes. My daughter had not just left a bad situation, she had found herself, and then found love that honored who she was. At one point during the evening, Patricia, who had been one of the first women to join the group, stood and raised her glass in a toast. "To Elena," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "for showing us that the most radical thing a woman can do is refuse to be erased." Everyone raised their glasses, a sea of hands holding hope and determination and hard-won freedom. "To Elena." I shook my head, smiling but uncomfortable with the focus. "Not to me," I said, standing and raising my own glass. "To all of us. To every woman who has ever been told she is too much or not enough and decided to stop believing it. To the ones who are still learning. To the ones who will come after us. We are not alone in this. We never were." The room erupted in agreement, voices overlapping, stories spilling out, connections forming. And as I looked around at these women, these fierce and resilient and reclaimed women, some with gray hair like mine, and some still young enough to avoid the worst mistakes I had made, I understood something profound. I had not just saved myself. I had created a space for others to save themselves too. And that legacy, more than the deed to my house, more than the money in my account, more than any single thing I owned, that was what would outlive me. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and I had washed the dishes and put away the leftover food, I sat in my chair by the window and looked out at my garden. The flowers I had planted were blooming in shades of purple and yellow and deep red. The tomatoes were heavy on the vine, ready for harvest. The small patch of herbs I had started had grown into a fragrant border along the fence. Everything I had nurtured was thriving. The desert air was cool and smelled like the rain that had fallen earlier, that rare and precious desert rain that transforms everything it touches. I picked up my phone and recorded a voice note, something I had started doing to document this chapter of my life, leaving a record for Sophia or for whoever might need to hear it someday. Today, I said into the quiet. I celebrated 2 years of freedom. 2 years of living in my own house on my own terms. 2 years of teaching myself that boundaries are not walls, they are doors, and I get to decide who walks through. I paused, gathering my thoughts, feeling the weight of what I wanted to say. If you are listening to this and you feel trapped, if you feel invisible, if you have been told that standing up for yourself makes you selfish or cruel, hear me. You are not selfish. You are not cruel. You are simply done, and being done is not giving up. It is waking up. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries. The people who do not were never loving you, they were using you. And you deserve more than to be useful. You deserve to be valued. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to say no without explanation. You deserve to prioritize your own peace. You deserve to be free. I stopped the recording and saved it, knowing I would share it with the group at our next meeting. Knowing it would eventually reach women I would never meet, in cities I would never visit. And maybe, just maybe, it would help one more woman realize she did not have to stay small to be safe. She could grow. She could rise. She could reclaim. I stood and walked through my house, turning off lights one by one, running my hand along walls I had painted, past furniture I had chosen, through spaces I had reclaimed, inch by inch. In the kitchen, I paused and filled a glass with water. I took a long drink and looked at the calendar on the wall. Next Wednesday was circled. Another meeting, another group of women learning to take their lives back. I smiled. This was my purpose now, and it was enough, more than enough, not to be a mother who fixed everything. Not to be a provider who sacrificed herself for others. Not to be the woman who disappeared so others could expand. My purpose was simpler and more powerful than all of that. To live loudly in my own quiet way. To love fiercely without losing myself. To teach by example that no one, not a husband, not a child, not a stranger who moved into your home and decided it was theirs, no one had the right to silence you in your own life. And if they tried, you changed the locks. You served the papers. You stood firm. You rebuilt. That night I dreamed of the desert, of vast open spaces and endless sky, of flowers blooming in impossible places against all odds, of women walking together across the sand, their voices rising strong and clear, saying the words I had finally learned to say. No more. Not today. Not ever again. And I am taking it back. When I woke the next morning, the sun was already high, streaming through windows I had cleaned myself, falling on floors I had refinanced and reclaimed, filling rooms that belonged to me and me alone. The day was already beginning, full of possibility and purpose, and I was ready. Ready for tea at my table, ready for the news at my preferred volume, ready for the women who would come through my door seeking the same thing I had found. Proof that it was possible. Proof that you could be 71, or 81, or 31, tired and dismissed and disrespected, and still rise, still fight, still win. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel, and tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. And I want to leave you with this final truth. The one I wish someone had told me decades ago. The one I hope every woman hearing this will write on her heart and remember on the days when doubt creeps in. You do not owe anyone access to your peace. You do not owe anyone your silence. You do not owe anyone the right to make you feel small. What you owe yourself is a life you do not have to recover from. A home you do not have to escape. A voice you do not have to find because you never lost it. You just stopped using it. So use it now. Say no. Say enough. Say this is mine and you cannot have it. And when they tell you that you are being unreasonable, difficult, selfish, ungrateful, cruel, smile. Because those words only have power if you believe them. And you do not have to believe them anymore. You are not difficult. You are clear. You are not selfish. You are self-respecting. You are not unreasonable. You are simply done being used. You are not ungrateful. You are appropriately grateful for what deserves gratitude and appropriately protective of what deserves protection. You are not cruel. You are honest. And honesty, when it disrupts someone's comfortable lie, will always be called cruelty by the person who benefits from the lie. But that does not make it true. I am Elena Castellano. I am 73 years old now, and I have never been more certain of who I am. I am the sole owner of my home, my story, and my future. I am a woman who learned the difference between kindness and doormat, between love and enabling, between family and obligation. I am someone who knows that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. And that relationship requires boundaries, respect, honesty, and the willingness to choose your own well-being, even when others call it selfishness. And no one, absolutely no one, will ever take that from me again. This is not the end of my story. This is the middle, the part where the protagonist has learned her lessons and is living them daily, the part where small choices accumulate into a life worth living. And if you are ready, if you are tired of shrinking, if you are done with the exhaustion that comes from managing other people's emotions and funding other people's choices and apologizing for taking up space in your own life, the real story, the one where you are the hero, not the supporting character in someone else's drama. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing that women like us, women who have been told to be quiet for too long, women who have been taught that our value lies in our service and our silence, deserve to be heard. Now go. Take your space back. Change your locks if you need to. Pour your own tea without fear. Plant your own garden. Choose your own colors. Say no without guilt. And never, ever let anyone tell you that you are too much. Because you are not too much. You are exactly enough. You are precisely what you need to be. And it is time the world learned the difference between a woman who is patient and a woman who is done. I am done being patient with disrespect. I am done funding other people's poor choices. I am done apologizing for existing. And I am finally free. May you find your freedom too, whatever that looks like for you. May you find the courage to change your locks, literally or metaphorically. May you find your voice and use it. May you find your boundaries and defend them. May you find your peace and protect it. And may you know, deep in your bones, that you deserve all of it. The peace, the space, the respect, the life you want. You deserve it all, and you always did.